Hello, I'm Dawn Durham, and welcome to PaTTANpod. Today, we are discussing the science of implementation. What is implementation? Why should we be thinking about this as a science? And what success criteria should we be establishing to ensure successful implementation of an innovation? Whenever we have a new innovation, and that could be a new curriculum, core reading or math, multi-tiered system of support, or a new intervention for a specific need, this innovation has to be implemented with fidelity to see the outcomes we desire. With implementation, it's not an, okay, let's do it in its perfect framework. There are stages of implementation that a team will have to go through to realize full, effective implementation of the innovation, whatever it is you're choosing to innovate. Joining us today to help explore the science of implementation is Dr. Dean Fixsen. Dr. Fixsen, thank you for joining us today and helping us understand the science of implementation. We appreciate you taking the time out to talk with us.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
So you are a implementation scientist at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And I'm not sure that all instructional leaders or practitioners really understand what an implementation scientist is. So hopefully you can help us kind of walk through what is an implementation scientist and maybe explain what is implementation science kind of along the way there.
Happy to do so. Implementation scientist, I must say, is kind of a self-appointed term. So implementation is still growing and developing, and but there are a few of us who've been around a while to pursue all of this, and so we're quite interested in establishing the science and having this be used to achieve socially significant, educationally significant outcomes. Really, at base, implementation science is about using things. To implement means to use, right? So that's the common use of the word. So the implementation science then really is the study of factors that influence the full and effective use of innovations in practice. So what is it then that influences the full and effective use of innovations in practice? So full and effective use is the key part of that. The work then of implementation scientists and implementation practitioners is to overcome whatever the barriers are, whatever gets in the way of the full and effective use of innovations in practice. Then that becomes part of what it is we study in implementation science and what it is that we seek to change when it comes to implementation practice. The corollary to the definition of implementation science, though, is that it really is about change. We have a very powerful status quo. It's very resilient. You poke it, you try to change it, you try to put MTSS in and use it with fidelity, the full and effective use of MTSS, and you come back a couple of years later and there may be MTSS language around, but not MTSS intervention. So the status quo, we know, is a powerful thing, and if you read about complexity science and other things, you understand kind of why that is. So the corollary then to the implementation science part of this is it's really the science of change and how you build this in at the practice level, the organizational level, the systems level, in all levels of education and other human services.
So you had mentioned the science of change, and I want to hold on to that term because that's really what we're talking about, is this idea of transformational change. Not just minor tweaks, but perhaps a change that would really transform the way in which, for example, we might practice or instruct students with a specific need, or the framework in which we put in place at a K-12 system, like a multi-tiered system of support. So the science of change, I want to hold on to that throughout our conversation today. And when we think about implementation, there are 3 levels of implementation. I'm hoping you can kind of help us distinguish between the 3. We have letting it happen, helping it happen, and making it happen. What are the three differences between those levels, and why do we need to understand what each of those levels of implementation are so that we can continue to implement effectively?
I'm so glad that you brought that up, because those are the three things that really guide a lot of our own work, and they are critical to understand those three levels of activity. Really, the letting it happen, helping it happen, making it happen are levels of activity, so that we can produce what we want to produce: educationally significant outcomes. The NAEP data, if you go back to the 1960s to now, and you look at the age 9 literacy rates, we've been churning around a mean of 215 on NAEP since the 1960s. That is not acceptable. So how then can we start to change that? So a good part of where we all started as scientists, and we still function in human services and education, is in the letting it happen category. We do research, we publish the research, there's a new curriculum, we get that out, there's a new set of books, and these are presented to teachers, to principals, to superintendents and others. And it's up to them then to figure out, well, what does this mean for us, and what should we do differently than we've ever done before? But that fits with a whole category of things that in implementation science known as diffusion. Bert Rogers, known for that, he spent his entire career looking at diffusion. But that's getting the word out, having people know about something, and for awareness, that's a very good thing. So helping it happen, or letting it happen, then, is the equivalent of diffusion. Well, that didn't work very well. So then people said, well, we need to be better at this. We need to get people together in meetings, and let's do some training so people will know better what this innovation is. They'll understand it more fully. They'll have a chance to ask questions. We'll have websites devoted to it. We're going to help it happen. And that all is now another part of implementation science known as dissemination research. We have diffusion, we have dissemination. Well, and that was better, but still not sufficient. Both of those things are necessary. Neither one so far is sufficient. So this is what has really led to the making it happen category. And this is implementation, really. If there's a barrier to something, people don't understand it fully, you don't say, well, gee, we gave it the best shot. We had the best training we ever could get available, and it's not my problem that they didn't get it. In implementation, it is my problem. I make it my problem, and it is up to me to help overcome those difficulties. So the progression from diffusion orientation to a dissemination orientation to an implementation orientation, and it's only at the implementation level that you have an implementation team of one kind or another that is really, they are the ones now accountable for helping to make sure that the innovation that we're talking about in education is actually in the classroom, being used as intended and producing the intended results every time. And that is a big change. But it's that latter part, it's the making it happen part that is new to the implementation world. And but that's taking a responsibility for seeing that the outcomes are there. Gene Hall, Shirley Hord, back in the 1980s talked about this, and they gave us a good head start down this path. But we're just now learning, what does that really mean, and how can we really do these things?
So when you talk about those three levels, and I think those are good words to be using, the letting it happen is making people aware, the diffusion. It's out there, here it is, we're putting it out there. the helping it happen is that dissemination of information, but we really can't get farther. We can't make that transformational change until we get to that making it happen. And that's where we really see the implementation. So it's, as you had said, that those first two levels of letting it happen and helping it happen, they're just not enough. It's good to have it. You absolutely need to make people aware. You absolutely need to disseminate the information and the innovation, but it's really not enough to implement, and that's where we need to get to that making it happen.
Right, and that is so important for education. I mean, back to the NAEP data again. Mm-hmm. If we're only in the diffusion dissemination, the letting it happen, helping it happen mode, then maybe 10%, 20%, and in some cases up to 30 or 40% of the people who are exposed to the information in the letting it happen, helping it happen categories, 10 to 20 or 30, 40% actually go and make use of what it is that they have just learned about. But as soon as they leave being the teacher or the principal or the superintendent, the next person maybe is not exposed to any of that. And so that's why we're churning around that mediocre mean of 215 on a 500-point scale for the NAEP literacy scores for those age 9 kids. And if they don't learn to read by age 9, they don't read to learn for the rest of their lives. I mean, it's just such a critical time. But that could be said of other innovations as well. So we need to make it happen. And if we start to make it happen, we can move those NAEP scores in the next 15 to 20 years.
That's good to hear. I'm looking forward to that movement. Now, you bring up a good point. If one person leaves, does the whole innovation kind of die down, right? The implementation process. So that brings us to the implementation teams. And you talked a little bit about this just a moment ago. When we're thinking about pulling together a core group of people to act as the implementation team to help move an innovation forward so that if one person leaves, it doesn't all collapse. What kind of guidelines should we be thinking about when we form this team? Because as instructional leaders listen to this podcast, they're going to want to know, well, who should I be pulling in? What kind of things should I be thinking about? Should I be thinking about personalities of individuals? Should I be thinking about their skill sets? Should I be thinking about the collaboration? So help us out with some guidelines to how to form this core implementation team.
It's a critical thing. We are sorely lacking people with implementation expertise, and which means then we don't have near enough implementation teams. Our own work in education in the states that we're working with the state implementation and scaling up of evidence-based practices, SysEP Center, funded by Department of Education. But that is really our work in those states, is to develop implementation teams. So in a very fundamental way, in education and in other human service applications, an implementation team at a minimum has 3 to 5 people who are expert in developing innovations, and we'll return to that in a second. They also know the implementation science and practice well, but they would know the active implementation frameworks that we have worked on for many years here at the National Implementation Research Network. But so they would be expert in that, and they would know how to make use of the implementation part then to help bring about systemic change, like in a state education system. And even impact some of the work at the federal level. So the skill set for implementation team members is pretty daunting. But that's why you want well, there's a couple reasons to have the 3 to 5 people at a minimum. Some teams have 8 or 10, depending on what is going on. But like at a school district level, 3 to 5 is not unusual. Okay. So no one person is going to know all about innovations and know all about implementation and know all about how to make use of that for systemic change. So it's the synergy that's created within the team itself is an important thing. So that gets into what you were just saying, like what are the characteristics of these team members? I mean, they need to be really good at facilitation. They need to be really good at presenting information. They need to be really good at teaching people how to do things differently in the context of a system that is still running and doing what it's always done every day. So you have to it's like changing a fan belt with a motor running, as one person told us. It's not a pleasant thought. But the team members, as a team, need to be able to do those kinds of things. So the whole selection process then for team members, they have to be knowledgeable, they have to be skilled in the facilitation parts of things, they have to be able to very quickly form relationships, not only with one another, but also with people that they're working with, and so on. So it is a very skillful set of things that are represented on an implementation team. Mm-hmm. The thing that we are finding is that these teams have unintended outcomes. We did not know 10 years ago when we started developing the implementation teams in education at the regional level, well, state level, regional level, district level, that these teams would become like a gyroscope. They are the stabilizer. They're the stable influence as everyone around them comes and goes. So we know that the state superintendents and so forth, district superintendents, their tenure is like 2 to 3 years. Mm-hmm. And so in the midst of all of this change, what is the constant that really keeps everybody on track? It's the implementation team. Never crossed our mind in the beginning, but that is now just a consistent bit of feedback that we get from people. So to have that be yet one more benefit, not only are they able to help get the innovation in place so that it is used fully, effectively, producing the outcomes that are intended, but they're also helping to stabilize the education system itself. And that's where we have great hope about reducing this churning around the mediocre mean. Mm-hmm.
So this core group of individuals, as instructional leaders, as I said, listen to this, they're really thinking through the staff they have access to and who has the skill set of the great facilitation, the great collaboration, the science of implementation under their belt, or who is willing to go and learn that information to join the team, as time comes. And you had said 3 to 5 people is pretty common in the district setting. Is that what I heard you say?
As a core team, there are usually 8 or 10 people who are working together. Mm-hmm. Every school system has a lot of people right now devoted to making improvements. Yeah. There's a school turnaround improvement group. There's a Title I. It goes on and on. So the people who have the facilitation skills, who understand the system really well and know where the leverage points are for making systemic change and organizational change. So those skill sets are where you really start to form a team. The critical missing piece again and again is the lack of implementation expertise. Yeah. And so that's where the work that you're doing there and the work that other people are doing to get the word out about implementation is so very important, because that is the missing component. But once these teams and team members learn it, educators are so smart. They are very capable. They are really well trained, and they all have wonderful verbal skills. It's kind of like an implementation team maker's dream. But it is the coordinated effort and the use of implementation science on purpose is what we need to add to the mix.
I think this would be a good time to make sure that all the listeners know about the National Implementation Research Network, or NIRN, that you are a co-founder of, to definitely go and visit their website, as that's where I get a lot of my implementation science information from. That's a vast knowledge of video clips and vignettes and tutorials of how to take a team through the science of implementation. There's a particular section that I often use is the Active Implementation Hub. where I get a lot of the learning modules from, to work with my school teams throughout the state of Pennsylvania on implementing something like a multi-tiered system of support. So I do encourage anyone who's out there listening to visit the NERN website, as I think that's a definite go-to spot. Do you have any other go-tos that you would suggest that we take a look at in regards to the implementation science besides the NERN website?
Well, on the NERN website, what we try to do there is to go to all the other go-to places, and having gone there, then we incorporate as much of what is important then into the NERN website.
Great.
So the Activate Implementation Hub, for example, this is something that we developed for our own use as we're doing the work in state education systems and in other venues. So it is a characteristic of our center and of NERN that we don't put anything on there that we have not used ourselves, that we have not found to be useful in practice. So it's passed the acid test, the reality test. But if it's useful to us and we're convinced of that, then it goes on the website. And so it's not a thing where we sit around and hope for things and wish for things. I mean, not that we don't do that, but those things don't end up on the website. The stuff that ends up there has gone through the fires of reality and have come out the other side, and it gets modified in many, many ways. So and updated over time.
As I said, that's definitely a go-to for myself for implementation science. I know here at PaTTAN and across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, we reference NERN often and encourage our school teams to jumping on that NERN website. So I hope that listeners will go ahead and do that. I want to pivot a little bit to implementation drivers. We talked about that implementation team, right? A core group of 3 to 5 experts, perhaps even 8 to 10, all working towards transformational change and school improvement and systematic changes. Implementation drivers, we want to look at what creates an environment for change. And these drivers really assist in that change of a true environment. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And then can you help us understand what an implementation driver is and why we need to be thinking about those drivers?
The implementation drivers, again, these are hard-won lessons out of reality. There are competency drivers, there are organizational drivers, and there are leadership drivers. And all of these things work together. And anyone who is in a school district and in any kind of an organization that is designed to provide services and high quality services and assure outcomes, everyone understands almost immediately where these drivers fit into organizations. And it's really, how do you run an organization in a way that on purpose you are producing exactly the outcomes that you intend to produce, and you are improving them month after month and year after year. So that's what the goal of the drivers is. So, but on the competency side, there's selection, training, coaching, and fidelity assessment. So this means that anytime that you are contemplating doing something new in a school system, who's going to be doing this work? Which teachers are going to be involved? Which of the principals in which schools are going to be the ones? And too often people are just assigned, and they are recruited in, with their wallets or whatever it is that happen to be. If you do this, we'll give you the money. So, but that turns out to be a pretty poor way of going about it. There's some pretty good data on that. So the selection part, we want people who are ready, willing, and able to do this work. So the ready and willing part is the selection. And so even if you have people who are there in the system already working, put out an email. Here's the new thing. We want to try out this new approach to literacy or what have you. And are you interested in being one of the first ones to participate? So that's part of the selection. The training part, everyone, if it's an innovation, innovations by definition are new things. well, how do you learn the new thing? How do you learn to do the new thing? And so training that has the behavior rehearsals built in, you have opportunities to practice and build skills. You learn how do you say the words to to these kids in the classroom or to those teachers in the school or wherever you are in the system. It's but we know that training by itself is insufficient. You don't get much uptake out of that. So coaching then was the next big lesson. And coaching is a critical part where you're there with people in their environment to help them actually do the work. And how do we know that the work is being done, which is the fidelity piece. And fidelity is not a scary thing. It just means, are we doing what we intend to do? We intend to do MTSS. We intend to do PBIS. Are we doing that? How do we know that we're doing that? So is there some way to assess it? And does it make a difference? Are the high fidelity performers actually producing better outcomes than the low fidelity performers? So there's the other piece of fidelity. But that on the competency side, but those things require changes to do selection that way, training that way, building in coaching. I mean, that is a challenge for every school in every district. Where do those people come from and how do we pay for it? And fidelity, my gosh, that's a scary thing, I mean, for everybody. So that's where the organizational drivers come in. So you have facilitative administration, everything that gets to be an impediment to the teachers and principals doing what it is that you're asking of them in the innovation, that becomes an organizational problem. How do we change then the meeting schedule so it better fits with this? How do we make sure the teachers have enough time to do the new literacy work in this way and so on? So the facilitative administration, every one of those things becomes an opportunity to change how the school is run, to change how the district is run. You don't want to solve one problem one time. That may get you by, for the next week or a month, but you want to solve this so that every teacher, every time this year and next, will not have to put up with that as a barrier. They'll have something as a facilitator. So the organizational piece of this is very important. And of course, none of that is going to happen without the leadership support. And so there are technical problems that need to be solved, and there are adaptive, more difficult, complex problems that need to be solved. And there are two leadership styles that go along with each of those. And so people need to learn about that. But at the top of the driver's triangle, as we call it, so we have the competency on one side, and we have organization on the other, and we have the leadership underneath. So there's the triangle. But at the top of that is fidelity, because how do you know that you are providing good training and coaching? You know that because teachers and principals are actually doing what you intend for them to do and what they intend to do. How do you know that you are actually adapting the organization so that this innovation and all of those competency drivers are being used as intended? Well, that's again, is a fidelity outcome. So fidelity, just to touch on this for 1 minute, is that this is something that is scary for some people. We've had people say, "Oh, this is just another teacher evaluation. We're up to our necks on that. Don't even talk to me about it." They get all excited about this, and rightfully so. I mean, there are so many layers of regulation and so forth in education. But the turning point, though, on the fidelity is that yes, this is an observation of teachers. Yes, this is an observation of principals, or fill in the blank. But it's really an assessment of those who are providing support to teachers. So if the teacher is not doing well, it's not blame the teacher. It's not her fault. It is, we then look, who's accountable for that? who did the training, who's doing the coaching, have you been doing fidelity assessments often enough to give her feedback on this, and so to track your progress in supporting that teacher. So it shifts accountability away from the teacher. Yes, the teacher is, I mean, if the teacher is not teaching in the classroom, those kids are not going to learn. I mean, that is fundamental. But if we are not supporting those teachers in every way possible, which is what the implementation drivers say, then we are not doing our job. And it's that shift is another part. That's where we're back to that making it happen piece. We are there to make it happen. We're there to support them so that they can meet fidelity criteria routinely, which means that they are providing the highest possible quality of instruction routinely.
I'm so glad that you spent some time on the word fidelity, because I agree with you. I know when we throw the word fidelity out there, you can kind of see people tense up a little bit. That term does cause some angst in some folks. And as you had said, I think they naturally assume it comes with evaluation. But I'm so glad that you spent some time to think about fidelity. It's not a matter of who's to blame. It's where's the breakdown and how do we improve on that breakdown so that everyone is successful. So it's not looking at one individual person, it's the entire system. And as you had said, those implementation drivers are not isolated. It's not competency by itself, it's not organizational drivers by itself, it's not leadership drivers by themselves, but they really have to mesh together and meld together. Otherwise, the entire triangle is not going to be successful. So I'm glad that we're really thinking about those things not in isolation but together, because that will help with the fidelity piece in letting folks and practitioners across the state know it's not an evaluation on a teacher, it's not looking at one specific observation of a teacher, but it's rather looking at the entire system and where did we break down. Because that's an important piece that I think people need to understand, not just about the science of implementation, but about anything with regards to fidelity. There's something that we get asked all the time here, and I have to ask it. When a school team is implementing a new innovation, whether it be multi-tiered system of support or a new reading curriculum or a new math curriculum, for example, what's a reasonable timeline that the team should place on themselves for full implementation where it's effective and they're seeing positive outcomes? I fear that people come to trainings, or we work on school teams, and I know you're smiling because you know exactly where this is going. We work with those school teams and they think I'm there on a Monday and by Friday everything will be peachy keen and perfect. And it's so hard to get folks to understand that, you know, this is a process. So hopefully your words can kind of give us some insight as to what's a reasonable timeline for implementation of an innovation.
Well, we all want it yesterday. Yep. I mean, and we're in the same boat. But it realistically, if you're really looking at change in a school district, in this school district, all of the schools, the 10, 12, 7, 40, however many, how long will it take to actually have the most effective reading program, math program, behavioral program? How long will it take to get this into at least half of all of those schools in the district so that it is being done with fidelity? And over again, it takes 2 to 4 years. It takes 2 to 4 years because it's not, just as we've talked about, it's not just the innovation. It's not just a teacher using that curriculum in that way in a classroom. It is all of the teachers in all of the schools with all of the kids using this in that way. So it's not just the innovation, you have to build in all of those implementation drivers. Who's going to do the training for all the teachers on this? And not only the training this year, but next year, and the teacher aides and the substitute teachers and anybody else who's going to come into contact with those kids. Who's going to do that, and who's going to do the pickup training when we have some turnover? I mean, we're not going to wait till next year. We're not going to have these kids not get their best education for the next semester just because somebody left. So there is the difficulty is building in not only doing the innovation as intended, but building in all the supports, the implementation supports, all of those competency drivers and organization drivers and leadership drivers into the district, into the schools, so that those consistent outcomes will be produced with and with high fidelity instruction on the part of teachers and principals and others. So, but 2 to 4 years, we're sorry to say, people for many years now have said, well, why do you make that as a recommendation? And we said, it's not a recommendation, it's an observation. When we look to see for those cases, and not that many, but for those cases that actually reach full implementation, where half or more of the intended users are using the innovation with fidelity, that's the definition, it takes 2 to 4 years. And that's in education, it's in mental health, it's in substance abuse, it's in global health settings. It's just everywhere. So I'm sorry to say that's it, but funders need to understand that, and people need to be patient with themselves. So, but it's not like you're waiting for year 3 to roll around. You're working your tail off the entire time. You're making it happen, which is all of those not only practice changes, but organization changes and the systemic change that needs to be there so that this can be done routinely. But sorry.
Well, like I said, I'm so glad that you were able to kind of verbalize and articulate the timeline, because I know that's a struggle. And you're right. It's because we want it to be perfect for our students. We want the outcomes to be positive. So we want to put our heart and souls into it. But it is a process. It takes time. And as you had said, 2 to 4 years is not a recommendation. It's an observation. It's a reality. That's what's realistic to see full implementation with fidelity, which is what we're looking for. So I appreciate your words on that. And I think the listeners here will really take that to heart and realize, give yourselves a little bit of time, be patient. And as you had said, the funders, the upper echelon in districts, also need to have that understanding that it's not going to be a pretty picture, for 2 to 4 years. Change is messy and it's slow. But knowing that ahead of time will certainly help out the process so that we are all in acceptance of that and can, as you had said, continue to work towards that every year and not just wait for year 3 to come around and say, okay, now we're at full implementation, everything's all peachy keen. Absolutely.
And people tell us, well, we don't have that kind of time. I mean, we have the legislature and whoever breathing down our neck. And we say, do what you need to do, but just look at the NAEP data every day and tell me, this has been the history, that we always have to do things so quickly. We have to do them then so poorly that we are not moving that line. That 215 has been there for those 9-year-olds since 1967. So how about we do things differently so we would have the opportunity to actually put these into place, take the 2 to 4 years to build the implementation supports for, and it's not, you start with maybe, K3 literacy, but once the implementation supports are there, that's generic. That's like building your finance department. Maybe you built it around one grant initially, but once you have the system in place, well, bring on whatever money that you have. And it's the same with implementation teams. So once that capacity is there, then math and behavior and special education problems, all of those things become part of what they can do.
They can just follow suit. Wonderful. Well, Dean, I have to say thank you so much, because you've really helped us understand the science of implementation and what it means in a school setting, not only the time frame, but how do we pull together a team, and why is it important to have that core group of 3 to 5 or 8 to 10 in a core group of implementation team. The implementation drivers, that it's not in isolation, but they meld together to really create an environment and a system where transformational change can occur. So I greatly appreciate your time and efforts. I have to ask, because we ask all of our guests this, we at PaTTAN, we strive to inspire educational change. We want to see professional growth from folks across the field. Is there any advice you can offer to the practitioners in the field listening that might inspire their own educational growth?
Inspire their growth. Well, I'll tell you what inspires me is those NAEP data. I have them pasted up on my wall. I should have had them behind me so you could see them, but we need to change that. And that means we have to change how we do our work. And that gets back to Elmore. Richard Elmore, just love his writing, but he said something, and this is a poor paraphrase, but but it's like for every increment of performance I demand from you, I have the responsibility for supporting you in accomplishing that. So there again, it's that shift. Let's not blame, fix the blame here or fix the blame there, which has been the tendency in, well, not only education, but other places. Let's fix the problem. Let's move that 215-point line on a 500-point scale by engaging this every day. So I think the inspiration, I don't know how that translates to everybody else. I'm at the end of my career, and other people are at their beginning. So I just I can only imagine what will happen in the next 50 years with them. But those data are just a constant reminder that this is really important. And how we have done our business in the last 60 years has not worked out all that well. And we really need to change these things in a fundamental way. And we think the missing link is this implementation knowledge and practice. So yes, do go to the NERN website, do go to conferences and meetings and learn more about this.
The implementation science, we just can't implement without understanding the science behind how to implement. And I appreciate your insights and your knowledge today, Dean, and thank you so much for spending time with us. Thank you to all of you in the field. You truly inspire educational growth every day in your students. And a special thank you to John Ragsdale for producing this podcast. We'll see you next time on PaTTANpod.